הארץ שלנו. כל הארץ, כולל עזה, כולל הלבנון.
עד שנשלים את המשימה שקיבלנו, כובשים, מגרשים ומתיישבים.
As long as Israel has the option of Greater Israel, it's not going to accept either a one-state or a two-state settlement.
Is it just a theory, or are we witnessing the execution of a carefully crafted plan? Israel doesn't have officially recognized borders. Some say not to be limited by them. And many are now pointing at the past year, and more specifically perhaps the past month, as proof that what's happened in Gaza, in the West Bank, and now in Lebanon has never been about self-defense. Have we been watching on live stream a project for what is known as Greater Israel? I'm Anelise Borges, and on this episode of The Stream, we discuss genocide, military objectives, and the future of the Middle East. But first, some context with Sheha.
You may have seen this image online of an Israeli soldier wearing a Greater Israel badge. This left many asking, is Israel trying to expand its territory by taking land from other countries? Even recent statements from Israeli authorities suggest that this could be the case. Take Israel's Minister of Diaspora Affairs, for example. He declared that Lebanon, despite its flag and political institutions, is merely an entity rather than a true state. By using the word entity, it essentially takes away from the fact that it's a true state. He even argues that these nations fail to meet the criteria of legitimate states. Last year, Bezalel Smotrich, leader of the religious Zionist party, presented a map that included the occupied West Bank and parts of Jordan as Israel. This bold claim sparked outrage from Amman and raised serious questions about Israel's territorial aspirations. In what many people online are calling a land grab, Greater Israel refers to a Zionist belief in a historic biblical land that spans from the Nile to the Euphrates. Here's what Daniela Weiss, leader of an illegal settlement, had to say about that.
From the Prat,
yes,
to the Nile. And I'm sure it will be.
And what about southern Lebanon?
If it is part of it, all of it. Even parts of Syria, part of Iraq, part of Iran. It's huge.
Given all this information, is Israel acting in self-defense, or is there a wider regional plan?
And to help us go through that particular question and more, we have joining us today Sami Hermez, author and associate professor at Northwestern University here in Doha, joining us today from Chicago. Journalist Seamus Malekafzali, live with us from Oregon, and writer Dunya Kamal, joining us today from London. Thank you all so much for being part of the stream. Dunya, there's been a number of discussions about this online recently, including some arguing that it's anti-Semitic to even talk about it, others saying it's all a conspiracy theory. What is your take? Would you say that self-defense was an excuse for us to actually see the emergence of Greater Israel?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think we need to look at the facts here. And what we've seen over the last year is that Israel has massively ramped up its settlement building in the West Bank. So according to an Israeli settlement watchdog, Peace Now, Israel has seized more land in the last year than the past 20 years combined. And so looking at the facts, I think we have to understand these actions of Israeli aggression across different sovereign nations, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and of course the genocidal assault in Gaza. We have to look at this not just as separated, isolated incidents, but there is a clear trend and a pattern of Israel's ultimate goal, which of course is expansion of its borders and control. I think there's a reason why Israel does not officially have officially recognized borders. It suits its interests in order to expand what it deems to be its own kind of promised land across the region. And if you look at even as far back as comments and statements said in Netanyahu's own Liquid Party, I think in their 1977 election manifesto, the slogan "From the river to the sea" was included in that election manifesto. So this is very much a core part of Israel's ultimate goal in the region.
As you said, that idea was heard before, the concept of Greater Israel. But Seamus, how prevalent would you say this idea, this plan, is among Israeli society? Is it something that is confined in the corridors of power, in the coalition government, or is it something that general Israelis are actually talking about and believing in?
If we're talking about the maximalist idea from the Nile to the Euphrates, I don't think that that's something that many Israelis typically think about, but the idea of expanding Israel into the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, into the Sinai Peninsula, into southern Lebanon, that is absolutely something that is within the normalized fabric of Israeli society. When in a eulogy for an IDF soldier killed in Lebanon by Hezbollah, when the eulogist can say that Lebanon is ours, Gaza is ours, and not bat an eye in the Israeli media, I think that speaks to how this isn't really out of the ordinary for anyone to hear.
Indeed. Sami, do you agree that this is not an idea that is limited to politics and to political campaigns? This is part, I would say, perhaps of Zionist ideology.
Yeah, thank you for this. And I think I agree with Seamus to an extent, but I think I'd go further, in fact, that we have to really look back to Zionism and the settler colonial project from its early days and see how even from the 1890s, right, when the first Zionists came in, they weren't coming in and saying, we're going to create Greater Israel and, you know, we're going to take all of your land. They were coming in slowly, right, buying up land and so on. And so even when you get to the 1947 partition plan, they're talking about, you know, a state, they're accepting a state that is smaller than what they ultimately conquer, right, in 1948. And so at each stage, we could have said, this is a conspiracy, this is a conspiracy. And in 1948, they took what is present-day Israel. And then in 1967, they took the West Bank and Gaza, right? And in fact, occupied it. So between 1948 and 1967, someone could have also said this is a conspiracy. So I think you know, there are two strands in Zionism. You have maybe, I'm not sure which is smarter, but you have the liberal strand, which is sort of, you know, we'll take what we get now and then we'll see what comes. And the kind of slow genocide, slow ethnic cleansing, so the 1948 sort of ethnic cleansing. And then you have the one on steroids, which is now, which is thinking, you know, this is the time if we don't kill all the Arabs, kill all the Palestinians. And I say Arabs as well, because it's beyond just present-day Palestinians, right? It's Lebanese as well. And so they kind of drive for more territory. They feel, I think, you know, this is, if it's now or never.
It's Lebanese, it's Iraq, it's Jordan. I mean, when Israeli bombs began falling on Lebanon, something very different drew the attention of social media users. This particular father-son moment. Take a look.
אלון הוא לבנון. אלון גר בשמחה ובכיף, במסגב עם, משפחה אוהבת, חברים לשחק איתם. בוקר אחד, בדרכו לגן, הצביע אלון על הערים ושאל את אבא, מה הערים האלו? אלו הרי לבנון. אי אפשר, זה מסוכן, האויב נמצא שם. זה עדיין לא שלנו, אמר אבא. זה יהיה שלנו, חשב אלון. לבנון שלנו.
Dunya, they were reading Alon in Lebanon, a book published by a settler organization, which has also been advertising things like this post on social media that reads, "It's time for a house in Lebanon. After eliminating the leaders of Hezbollah, are you dreaming of a big house with a mountain view and a warm community in the land of our ancestors, the tribes of Asher and Naphtali?" Dunya, would you say Lebanon is a turning point here in terms of making Israel's intentions clearer for people?
I think so, yes. I think when you look at what's been happening in the last year, in Palestine, there would be people who would argue that this is isolated to the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict, as many like to call it. But I think with what's happening in Lebanon, what we're seeing is we're living out this ethno-supremacy ideology in real time, and we're seeing the consequences of that. So looking at the fact that Israel has conducted more than 4 times as many attacks on Lebanon as Hezbollah has returned. This is ongoing since October 7th, but also in more recent months, we've seen that escalation. And I think we're looking at that alongside what we've also seen in recent weeks, for example, the boat tours of Gaza, and understanding that the idea that this land is not sovereign to these nations. Lebanon is not deemed a sovereign state. That same minister who said that also said that Syria and Iraq are not sovereign nations. So when you look at it in that sense, you have a state that is acting as if its neighbors essentially do not have the legitimate control of their own borders. And so that creates this kind of manufactured consent for further expansion and control for Israel.
Indeed, they've been calling Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq all entities, right, as opposed to states. I mean, the discussion online was also fed by elements like this one. Take a look.
Lebanon, apparently, is also a part of Israel's promised territory. By the way, this article in the Jerusalem Post has since been deleted, but the internet is forever. In the now deleted article, Mark Fish claimed that the land promised by God to the children of Israel includes part of modern-day Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and even Turkey, with Fish citing religious texts to support his claims. He says that the Torah provides clear guidelines regarding the areas we were commanded to conquer when taking possession of the land. Quote, every place your foot will step has been given to you.
Sami, you're from Lebanon. How does this and everything that's been happening over the past few weeks, how are these things making you feel?
I mean, on one hand, it's depressing and bleak and dangerous times. But on the other hand, I don't see a way in which Israel wins this. I mean, they can destroy and devastate and kill, and they did this to Lebanon in 2006, right? They pummeled Dahiya, they killed people, but they lost. There is, this talk of Greater Israel. They want to take the Litani to create a buffer zone, but they can't have a buffer zone. They won't have a buffer zone. I mean, Hezbollah can launch rockets from anywhere in Lebanon into Israel, and so this. I think there's a lot of hubris at the moment. The Israelis feel like they're all powerful, but it goes back to. They can, these sort of tactical wins, but strategic defeats. That they don't have a solution, and so they're going to just keep on doing this, going on a killing spree, which is, it's depressing, of course. But I think, Hassan Nasrallah's last speech, he said, welcome, come in, and let's see what, we'll take you on our grounds, and I think. Empires, settler colonies, they have a need to expand. And I think if they try to expand, they're going to stretch themselves thin. And so, in a sense, they play into your trap, as Hezbollah's trap in a sense. So there's just two ways of looking at this. On one hand, the kind of human angle and the humanitarian, but then also sort of the long view, the strategic view, the kind of military view is that this. I don't see how this ends well for the Israelis.
I appreciate the long view here, because with 40 plus killed in Gaza, it's been hard for anyone to actually look at the big picture. And as Sami mentioned, the idea of a greater Israel didn't come up on October 7th. Here's a bit of history around the term. Take a look.
While it has religious origins, the Greater Israel concept is referenced from the very first days of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement was the movement of European Jews who wanted Jews in Europe to move to Palestine to create a Jewish state. One of the first mentions of Greater Israel is written in the founder of the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl's diary in 1898, just 1 year after the first Zionist Congress. On page 711 of his diary, Herzl describes a geographic proposal for a hypothetical Jewish state and says that the area demanded will be from the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. He then goes on to describe how this area will be slowly transferred from an Arab majority to a Jewish majority.
Seamus, again, for some context here, when we've been talking about international law, but then the counter-argument is biblical rights, as if the Bible was a legal document. How do we even argue the point here?
I don't think the point is to really argue the point with Zionists. I mean, when Netanyahu talks about, recently with his message to Lebanon, he invoked security, he invoked all these different things, but he also invoked Israel's right to win. I mean, this is not somebody who is asking for, any parameters from international law to justify him anymore. He is talking purely about what Israel is able to do on its own. Without, the ICC, without the ICJ enforcing the laws that they are enabled to enforce, there's no point to talking about international law when it comes to Israel.
That is pretty bleak, isn't it? I mean, Dunya, the ICJ actually issued that historic advisory opinion this year, stating that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territories is unlawful and it should come to an end. And as you said, this happened the year that we saw a record land grabbing on behalf of the settlers. Can you talk to us about the role of the settlers in all these individuals that are moving to these territories and building their lives there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also worth noting that by 2023, so by last year alone, there had been a roughly around 700,000 settlers living illegally on stolen Palestinian land. And I think it's also interesting to note that, of course, these settlements are deemed illegal under international law. But as Seamus said, when we talk about the legality of these actions, it really becomes irrelevant because Israel likes to have its own differentiation on these things. So, for example, settlements that Israel likes to say are legal, they differentiate between settlements and outposts. But in fact, they also retroactively legalize outposts. So they legalized around 6 outposts last year, and we're in the process of legalizing 10 other outposts last year. So you see the pervasiveness and the kind of enmeshment of both Israeli government actions and the settlers that are legitimized by this. You've seen videos of settlers acting with impunity, and Israeli soldiers are standing by, really not enforcing anything because, of course, this is deemed to be fairly legitimate, even if it might be unofficial or kind of unspoken in that sense. And I think we also have to understand the enmeshment of settlers and politicians. So the reference I made to the boat tours, there was, of course, Anelise, the settler movement leader, but there was an Israeli politician also attending that boat tour. So these things aren't separate in society and in government. They are very much enmeshed.
Isn't it crazy that we're having a conversation about how international laws become irrelevant in the face of a country? I mean, Sami, you said something very powerful before the show, and actually earlier during the show. You said that before October 7th, there was a slow genocide in place. Can you explain what you mean there and how that fits into this greater Israel plan?
Well, I mean, just looking at before October 6th, there was a report that Palestine was the most dangerous place for children. Right? This was before October 6th. So October 7th. So we have to, really look at that. Look at what was happening before. When I say slow genocide, I mean what the settlers were doing was taking a house from this village, taking land here, trying to start opening up an outpost. So it was slow taking of land, slow annexation of the West Bank. So we would talk of a de facto annexation, and all it needed was a kind of legal annexation or the declaration from the government, but it was happening slowly. Or you had a 17-year-old siege on Gaza. What do you call that, where you're keeping the calorie count of every Gazan to a limit? These are forms of slow depopulation or slow genocide, asking people to either leave or really just trying to live in smaller and smaller Bantustans. I want to say just one thing on this whole legality thing. I think it's really important that we recognize, that woman who was talking about wanting Israel from, I don't know, the Euphrates to whatever. These are people who are speaking because there's impunity, right? Any society that you give a free hand to do whatever they want and to annex land and to take land, you may see this, right? And so I think if you institute a system of accountability and war crimes tribunals and so on and so forth, these people would not talk this way, and they will hopefully stop to think this way too.
We have a very limited time until the end of the show, but I want to have your opinion here on one particular issue with regards to the future. I know it's very difficult to talk about this in the current context of a genocide in Gaza and also the invasion of Lebanon, but for the sake of this discussion, how do we fix this? How do we stop it? What does dismantling this idea, this culture, what does it look like? I mean, Sami, your take, is it as simple as, I don't know, the US withdrawing support from Israel?
There definitely needs to be a change in the geopolitical landscape. So as long as the US believes that its destiny, its power, its hegemony is tied to Israel, which at the moment it is, and those two are very much tied. As long as there's no, the cost is fine for them, then they're going to continue to support Israel. And I think, this question about the future is really important, and we really need to be sort of populating this vision with sort of material realities. What does it mean? What does liberation mean? What does it mean for Palestinians to return? And I think there is a world in which Palestinians return, where Jews in Palestine are de-Zionized. They no longer have this ideology of Zionism. And those that do continue to, have no place in that land, right?
Can stay and can live together. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I want to give Seamus and Dunya a chance to answer this as well. Seamus, what does the future look like for you? How do we dismantle this ideology?
I mean, talking about the fact that it's simple, it is indeed simple that if America withdraws its support for the current war that Israel is waging, that a lot of this can be immunized, at least in the temporary. But that is not simply done when two major parties are completely in lockstep about the need to continue funding this war in perpetuity. I think this is not a state that is stable. This is a state that is spinning out and is headed towards its own destruction. Though the issue is that I think it's going to take a lot of things down with it. I think more barriers are going to be broken down, more borders are going to be crossed by Israeli military troops. And I don't know what the future holds, but I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
That sounds so scary. Dunya, how does one imagine a future where multiple ethnicities can actually live on this land? Can we imagine that future right now?
Yeah, I think we've seen Israel pushing a bunch of red lines and finding that there aren't really any when it comes to its actions. What we need to see are arrest warrants. We need to see arms embargoes. We need to see tangible steps towards governments that are now refusing to be complicit in this. I think that's a really important kind of tangible, practical, actual step that we can see. And besides that, I think I echo others' comments on this, that there needs to be a dismantling to learn that you cannot speak and as if another community or your existence comes at the cost of another community's. It's really important that we try to ensure that all people living on this land, everyone deserves and has a right to live safely and freely on this land. But I think we first need to see tangible steps like arrest warrants and like arms embargoes. And then we can talk about the dismantling of a society that is no longer allowed to act with impunity in the way in which these settlers and the Israeli government has been allowed to act.
So we begin with justice and accountability. Dunya, Seamus, and Sami, thank you so much for being part of the stream today. And thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to stay in touch with us online. You can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream, and we will look into your questions and suggestions. Take care. and I'll see you soon.